I need to practice that. Anyway, yes, hello. Doing this again. The wall's changed a bit. We got them now. Couple of apologies for my haircut. It's appalling. I did it myself, you can probably tell. You obviously already know that this video is about F-35s because you've read the title and seen the thumbnail, although the thumbnail may have nothing to do with F-35s, I've not decided yet. It depends how lazy I feel. Yeah, so basically, firstly, bit of housekeeping. If this video is really long, there might be an unexplained cut at roughly the half an hour mark, because this camera is a photograph camera, so it doesn't record for more than 29 minutes and 59 seconds for tax reasons, because if it records for longer than that, legally it's a video camera and you have to pay more tax on that, so the manufacturers put a cap on 29, 59, regardless of how big the SD card inside it is. So that's why there might be a cut. And you might not even see this bit in case I cock up further on in my sentences. So what I'm going to talk about is F-35s, but particularly the F-35B, and why Britain bought the F-35B rather than the A or the C. Now, I will be showing you throughout this pictures of F-35As and Bs. Unlikely you'll get a picture of an F-35C, because I've never taken a picture of an F-35C and I like to use my own pictures because of copyright and that sort of thing. But if you don't see one, you can just look. I'll describe the F-35C and you can go and Google it. It's really easy to find. And the point I want to make is that the F-35B is the worst F-35 in pretty much every way, and that is why we bought it. Sounds a bit weird, but that's it. I've got a sheet of notes I made last night rather than doing anything actually productive, just with some statistics on. I hope no one captures me going blah blah and then I don't have enough subscribers for anyone to bother doing that. No one's even got this far in the video. Anyway, so I've got some statistics. I can remember most of them, but I like to get it right, so I've written them down. And you may be asking, oh Douglas, but the F-35B, that's the one that hovers. It goes hover, hover, and that's why it's really cool. And I agree, that is really cool. Although a lot of people, particularly in Britain, I don't know about other parts of the world, I've not been to most of them, they say, oh, it's not as good as the Harrier, don't like it as much as the Harrier, it's not as elegant as the Harrier. Yeah, they're right, and we'll get onto that if I remember. I'm having difficulty with speaking. It's because I can't speak properly. I'm from Cumbria, it's allowed. So, in what ways is the F-35 worse than the F-35B worse than the F-35s A and C? Well, first, what are the F-35s A and C? Well, the F-35A is just like any other standard ground fighter. It takes off along a runway and it will go this way. It lands along a runway. It can't hover and it can't take off or land on aircraft carriers. It's just normal. And you might think that's a bit boring, and yeah, it is. But what it means is that it can be much more agile and useful in the air. Because if you see here, you see that lump behind the cockpit on the F-35B? That was an F-35B. Look at the F-35A. There's no lump. No lump. And that's where the fan goes. So if you see an F-35 hovering like this, there's that fan behind the cockpit, and the flaps open at the top and they open at the bottom, and there's a fan that's driven by a shaft from the engine at the back, and that produces downward force, because obviously if you only had the nozzle at the back pushing downwards and generating lift and nothing at the front, it would tip over. It would just spin, spiral, and you wouldn't have an F-35 for very much longer. So that's there, and it's really useful, but it's heavy. And, well, of course it's heavy. And when you're just doing normal forward flight, it's just a big lump of metal that's doing nothing. And that big bulge, that's making more drag. So that's an advantage that the F-35's A and C have over the F-35B. They don't have big fans in them, and so less weight and less drag. Although the F-35C almost definitely produces more drag because it's got bigger wings. We'll get on to that. Yeah, and again, the engines at the back, the exhaust, that doesn't have to swivel down. And it's actually a really, really interesting and clever mechanism that makes it. It's like the tube rotates and it's at angle. So anyway, that it doesn't have to do that. So fewer moving parts and less weight. So generally, the F-35B is just heavier. How much heavier? Well, for the F-35A, the empty weight is 29,300 pounds. We're doing things in pounds because we do things properly here. For the F-35B, its empty weight is 32,429 pounds. That's more than 3,000 extra pounds. And for those of you who use French units, that's over a ton. Over a metric ton heavier. And the empty weight means obviously no fuel on board, no oil, no weapons, no external fuel tanks. Just the lump of metal that is the aeroplane is an extra ton. That's really important. And of course, it's also space. And space is really useful, particularly on the F-35. So the internal fuel storage, so not including external fuel tanks, an F-35A can carry 18,250 pounds of internal fuel. The F-35B can carry 13,500. Big difference there, and that means much smaller range. How much smaller? Well, the range of an F-35A, just on internal fuel, roughly 1,200 nautical miles, and the F-35B, it is roughly 900. So obviously, it's much heavier, which means it can't carry as many weapons, heavy weapons. What's that? We'll do the load. Okay, 18,000 pounds for the F-35A, same as its fuel, just a little less. And the F-35B can only carry 15,000 pounds, which is 3,000 pounds less. 3,000 pounds is the same figure, roughly, as the empty weight difference. So what you've done there is you've traded weapons you can carry for a fan. And if you're not using the fan, which is for the vast majority of the flight, it's just a dead weight and it's not useful. So that's the A model. So the RAF, which is using the F-35B, would prefer to use the F-35A because it's just a more capable machine. The max G limit, positive G, for the F-35A, 9 Gs. For the F-35B, 7. Again, it's not a massive difference, but it's useful. And all these things do add up to make a generally less capable aircraft. Now it's worth mentioning that of course the F-35 is far more capable than the Harrier. For a starter, it's way bigger, and bigger means more weapons, it's faster. The Harrier FA2, fastest of all the Harriers, just about get Mach 1 in a dive. The F-35B Mach 1.6, no trouble. So obviously it is an upgrade from the Harrier. But why do people prefer the Harrier? Well, because on the Harrier, well, here's a picture of a Harrier hovering. And here's a picture of an F-35B hovering. The Harrier is much cleaner. It's just got 4 little nozzles that it needs to rotate. And everything is useful, whereas with the F-35B you've got all flaps and everything, and the massive exhaust at the back needs to move, and you've got the fan. Again, the fan's a dead weight. All those nozzles in the Harrier, they're used in forward flight. The fan, forward flight, dead weight. So it's just not as elegant. That's my theory as to why people, at least here, don't like it. Also, they look at the F-35 bit as just being really American, and so they don't like it for that reason. Rightly or wrongly, that's one reason they don't like it. So that's why the RAF might not like the F-35B as much as they would the F-35A. But of course the Royal Navy, which is the main focus with the F-35B programme in the United Kingdom, is they've got new supercarriers which are designed specifically for the F-35B. And so why did they buy the F-35B rather than the F-35C? I mean, if we look at how much the F-35B costs compared to the F-35C, it costs 101 million US dollars for an F-35B, whereas for the F-35C, it's 94.4 million. So it's cheaper. It's cheaper to buy the F-35C. They should buy the F-35C. No, because the cost is actually in the boat, the aircraft carrier, the 65,000 ton boat they're going to put them on. Because you'll have seen the big ramp on the front of the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers, and if you've been looking, there was also one on the Invincible class aircraft carriers, and they stuck one on HMS Hermes, which has just started being cut up at time of recording, which is criminal. It really is, but hey, nothing we can do about it. Some people just really hate heritage. Yeah, so it's got a big ramp on the front, and the purpose of the ramp is to eliminate the use of catapults. So a conventional aircraft carrier has a set of catapults at the front. The Americans have been using 4 at the moment. They have 2 at the bow and 2 at the waist for launching aircraft, and then they use arrestor wires on the back, which is what I want to get across is that a conventional aircraft carrier using those catapults and arrestor wires is way better than one with a ramp used for STOVL aircraft, because a CATO bar, which stands for Catapult Assisted Takeoff, Barrier Arrested Recovery, I think, if I'm wrong, I'll put a correction up. Those aircraft carriers are far more versatile, but they're way more expensive. If you look at the air wing that's going to be on aircraft on the Queen Elizabeth class, the fixed wing aircraft are all going to be F-35Bs, and then helicopters. Whereas if you look at some of the CATO bar aircraft carriers, and there are only 2 countries that use them still, the United States and France, they have a wide range of fixed wing aircraft because catapults are more versatile, and you don't need STOVL aircraft to use them. So you can have long range airborne early warning aircraft such as the Hawkeye or the Viking, I think it is, yeah. Which means that you can fly that aircraft far away from your ship. It's got a big radar on the top, and it can tell you about incoming threats far earlier than anything else. And you think, well, we got helicopters for that. Yeah, we do have helicopters for that. They can't fly as fast and they can't go as far, so you're going to be warned a lot later. The last time we had airborne early warning aircraft on an aircraft carrier was 1978 on Ark Royal's last deployment, and they were Fairy Gannets. They had a great big radar dome, same radar dome that was used in the Shackleton. I'll just get it. I didn't plan on bringing out the Shackleton, but we may as well. Yeah, they stuck one of those under the Gannet, and because the Gannet's a lot smaller than the Shackleton, it looked quite funny. But it worked. Yeah, so I've got my point across. You're far more versatile with a CATO bar aircraft carrier. The one advantage I can think of, other than cost, of one of the STOVL carriers is that you can probably recover, if you have loads of aircraft in the air and you need to recover them all quickly, I think it should be possible to recover the STOVL aircraft faster than the conventional ones, I think, but I don't know that there's ever been a comparison done, and it's all down to technicalities and the conditions. So, but I think it should be possible to land everything on a Stovall carrier faster than a Catobar carrier. And you may be asking, well, why did we buy two big Catobar carriers, spend £7.6 billion on the two, if they're not as good? How come France has got a Catobar carrier? Yes, France has got a Catobar carrier. One. And that ship is going to have to spend a significant amount of its time in refit, just like every other ship. So when the French have their aircraft carrier being refitted, they haven't got an aircraft carrier. If one of our carriers is under maintenance, we've still got an aircraft carrier. And also, the French carrier is 42,000 tonnes, ours are 65,000 tonnes. That's more than an Invincible class worth of difference. And it also cost more. Well, it didn't cost more than both of ours. One of theirs cost more than one of ours. But that's not a direct comparison with Catobar versus Stovall, because theirs is nuclear powered, ours are powered by fossil fuels, which isn't really much of a disadvantage. People say it's a massive disadvantage. It drastically increases the cost of the carrier in its lifetime. And okay, yeah, it's got a limited range, but the carrier's never going to go anywhere on its own. It's going to have escort ships, and it's going to have supply ships. And it's always going to have a supply ship pumping fuel into it every couple of days, because the aeroplanes burn fuel. So you may as well pump on some fuel for the ship anyway. Yeah, it means you're going to go through your tanker a bit faster, but for the cost and the not really much more inconvenience, I think it's probably worth it. But yeah, their pokey little 42,000 tonne carrier cost way more than a great big 65,000 tonne carrier. And why is size so good? Why did we get two big ones instead of four smaller ones, or three slightly smaller ones? Because basically, when it comes to ships, bigger is better. You have a little ship that's hit by an anti-ship missile, it's got a much greater chance of going down than a massive ship being hit by an anti-ship missile. And yeah, the big ship is slightly easier to detect, but nowadays with modern radar and modern technology, doesn't make that much difference. And so the bigger ship, it's safer. It's also much easier to move your aircraft around. If you've got, so the maximum capacity of the Queen Elizabeth class in an emergency, about 70 aircraft. You see headlines saying, oh, the ship's only going to carry 24 aeroplanes. Yeah, on that deployment, if you want to be doing things really quickly and have space for all of the aircraft in the hangar, yeah, put 24 F35s on. But in an emergency, she can carry way, way more. In the before the Falklands, HMS Hermes only carried 5 Sea Harriers and a load of helicopters on most of its deployments. But when it needed to, they got more than 20 on it by the end of the Falklands War. So you can pack an aircraft carrier, but so you can get, in theory, about 70 aircraft on HMS Queen Elizabeth, whereas on Charles de Gaulle, I think the max is about, I wrote this down, hang on, talk amongst yourselves. It's about 40. About 40 Rafales max, but it's a much smaller carrier. You cannot fit as many aircraft on, and obviously the more aircraft the better. If some of them go wrong, you've got more. And also, if you only had 40 on each carrier, Queen Elizabeth is going to be able to be... It's blinking at me. Why is it blinking? I'm at 19 minutes. Oh well. Oh, nearly tripped over. Try that again. If you put 40 aircraft on each ship, they can both hold 40 aircraft, but you're going to be able to turn around the aircraft on Queen Elizabeth much, much faster, because you've got more space. You don't have to be shuffling Things, you know, that game you play where you got the squares and there's only one tile and you've got to shift them all around to make space and make the pattern. Yeah, it's like that, but with aeroplanes, and it takes time. But if you've got lots of space on your ship, you don't have to do that. You can get aircraft taking off and landing much faster. So it's just better to have a big ship. It's also cheaper to run 2 large ships than it is to run 3 slightly smaller ships. Once you've got an aircraft carrier out there, that's the majority of the cost. An extra 20,000 tons doesn't really play that much into it. So that's why we've got the F35B. It's because of the boats. It made much more sense to buy some Stovall aircraft carriers than it did to buy fewer or smaller Catobar aircraft carriers. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, well, none of you will be thinking this because we're 20 minutes in and this is boring as hell. You might be thinking, yeah, but it's far more flexible for an F35B because it can hover and it can land anywhere. Is it though? And it can hover in dogfights and make it. Well, for all those examples, I'm going to bring you back to 1982 in the South Atlantic. What a surprise! I'm sorry, but that's the only conflict I can think of where vertical takeoff and landing aircraft were used as primary air superiority fighters and were doing dogfights. For instance, the Americans have never. You say, oh, they used loads of Harriers. Yeah, they bought. They didn't. But the RAF Harriers were never really fighters. They were ground attack aircraft. They were all designated GR something, GR 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. I don't know why they skipped the even numbers. And it was only the Royal Navy that bought the fighters. So this is an FA2 fighter attack. It's got the F in there. The RAF ones never had the F in there. So the Americans' Harriers were all on the RAF style of things. They were used by the US Marine Corps and the US Air Force. I don't know if they were used by the US Air Force. They were definitely used by the US Marine Corps. My point is, the AV-8A and the AV-8B, which is what the Americans used and still do use, is a ground attack aircraft. It's not a fighter. What I'm trying to say is, the Falklands is relevant, and it's the most relevant conflict to this argument. Think about how easy it is to rotate 4 nozzles. And compare that to how difficult it is to get the F35B to do all its gubbins. The Harriers never used VIFing, as it was called, thrust vectoring, in their Harriers during a dogfight in the South Atlantic. Not once. So it just doesn't get used in dogfights, your vertical takeoff and landing capability. And you may be thinking, yeah, well, what about HMS Sheathbill, San Carlos Forward Operating Base? They could take off from the carriers, they could land on this makeshift runway, and they could refuel and they could go off. Yeah, that's true. They had a really short range, so they had to do that. They were using Stovall aircraft carriers, which meant that they couldn't have anything like tankers on them. So they couldn't refuel mid-air. Yeah. Every example of an advantage of a Stovall aircraft can be solved, admittedly, with just a conventional aircraft with more money. So this whole, oh yeah, well, they were getting the Tiger class cruisers. They were going to get Tiger and Blake and send them down there, recommission them, and they could land a Harrier on the back. Yeah, they could land a Harrier on the back. They could land a Harrier on the back of some other warships down there as well. But they wouldn't have to refuel, because you could, with a Catobar aircraft carrier, you could send out tankers. What they used to do with the Blackburn Buccaneer S1s, because they had the really puny Gyron Junior engines, they couldn't take off from an aircraft carrier with both full fuel and full weapons load. So what they would do is they'd have a full weapons load and a little bit of fuel, launch it, and then refuel from a scimitar in mid-air. You have that flexibility. with a Caterpillar aircraft carrier that you just do not have with a Stovall aircraft carrier. I think that's all my points. If I've missed anything, that's a shame, but I think you've got the general gist. And just out of curiosity, if you have made it this far, comment the word rifle in the comments. I'm just interested if anyone made it this far. I think that's it. We didn't make it to half an hour, thank God. Goodbye. Right, it's a new day, and I just need to clarify a few things that I missed or possibly got wrong having watched it back. You know it's a new day because it's different t-shirt. First thing I want to address, I know I apologise for my haircut at the start of the video. It's not until watching it back that I realised I had a little tuft of hair there. You certainly noticed it and were annoyed by it, and so was I. Secondly, I didn't actually get on to explaining why the F35C has bigger wings. It's pretty obvious: bigger wings, bigger wing area. Bigger wing areas produce more lift, which means that you can have a slower stall speed, which is handy for when you're landing on an aircraft carrier. Now, I've not seen any official figures about the F35C's stall speed compared to any others, but having even a little bit of knowledge about aerodynamics. Is that the doorbell? I don't think so. Having a little bit of knowledge about aerodynamics, yeah, it has a slower stall speed. When I said that the aircraft carriers were the main focus of the UK's F-35 programme, I more meant that in terms of the media. There's a big media focus about the F-35s and comparing them to the Harriers. So obviously the F-35s are replacing the Harriers for the Royal Navy, but in the RAF it was seen as the F-35 replacing the Tornado. They don't really do the same thing, but yeah. So they're ordering 138 is the plan, and they will essentially be shared between the two services. And one thing I didn't say as well is when comparing internal fuel. Have I still got the paper on me? I have not. Where's it gone? It doesn't matter. Yeah, so about £13,000 compared to about £18,000 of internal fuel between the A and the C, and the A and the B. I think the A and C carry similar amounts of internal fuel. Anyway, the F-35B is a stealth aircraft, which means that it has a very small radar signature, which makes it difficult to detect. You can still detect it, but it's difficult. And that means that if you want it to be stealthy, you have nothing on the outside. So you only use the internal weapons bay, which is shown here. And you don't have any external fuel tanks. Now, you can put external weapons and fuel tanks on an F-35, but that means that it's no longer a stealth aircraft, because you've suddenly got all these pylons and circles that can ding your I didn't swear there. That can ding your radar beam straight back to the receiver. So if you put external stows on an F-35, it's no longer a stealth aircraft. You're far more likely to have to put external fuel tanks on an F-35B than an F-35A or an F-35C, which means that its stealth capabilities are pretty much compromised. And also, I didn't get on to mention that the F-35A has an internal 25mm Gatling gun, which the B and the C lack. Obviously, point to the F-35A, whilst over the horizon missiles and very, very high-tech missiles are useful. Missiles do have a minimum range, guns do not. It's been shown multiple times that guns are useful. And you may say, oh, well, if you're at war and you detect an aircraft over there, you could just fire your missile over the horizon and that's that, sorted. Yes, but it's actually quite difficult to identify the precise type of aircraft from a radar signature. So quite often, you get close to it to work out what it is. and then you fire your missile at it. For instance, I was at RAF Coningsby in February, just spotting, nothing, you know. That was the doorbell. Yes, that was the doorbell. Anyway, what am I on about? Is the microphone on? Microphone is on. I think I was talking about internal guns and over-the-horizon missiles. Yeah, so my basic point is that guns are good. For instance, the Falklands War again, let's go to that. The combat air patrol that the Harriers were doing, the ones where they were doing their patrol low down, at low altitude, which is where the Argentinians were, they were far more effective than the ones at high altitude. And obviously, if you're low down, then there might be mountains around. You know, you can't fire over the horizon missiles over the horizon because you just everything's in the way. I'm sure you understand it. So yeah, guns are good. They do make a gun pod which can be attached to the B and C. The only trouble with that is that the government have said they're not buying one. Well, they're not buying any. So the F-35s are going to have no guns, which is not ideal. Although they did say with the Typhoons that originally they weren't going to have the guns in the Typhoons, but then they changed their minds on that. And they also said that the F-35s weren't going to be low altitude platforms and weren't going to train below 5,000 feet, but they also changed their minds on that, and they've been doing low flying through Cumbria and other places, I'm sure. Maybe. I know they've been through Cumbria. Yeah, so Scotland as well. I don't think they've been on the Mach Loop. I don't know if fast jets from the RAF are back in the Mach Loop. They might be, they might not be. I've never been. Yes, so guns are good. The government should buy them, and yes. I don't know if I've got any. Shall we try that revolver thing again? Let's give it a go. It's been a day. I haven't done any practice since. Let's give it a go. Obviously, it's not a real revolver. You can tell that because you're not stupid. I'm left-handed as well, which is a shame. Yeah, it's just I can do that. What? That's a no.